Today, I'm excited to have guest John Rossman on the program. John is the managing partner at Rossman Partners, a consulting agency dedicated to helping leaders innovate, compete, and win in the digital era. He is also the author of The Amazon Way, Amazon's 14 Leadership Principles, a book where he shares his leadership insights from his tenure at Amazon, helping launch Amazon's third-party marketplace. John, welcome to the show.
Eric, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You know, I'm excited to have you on the program. This is a podcast really dedicated to marketing. And I will say that as we talk about marketing, two companies always rise to the top as examples. You know, Apple certainly from a marketing standpoint, some of what they do, and Amazon from a customer experience perspective. So I'm going to enjoy today's discussion. We're going to get your insight on all of this. But to kick things off, I'd love it if you could share with the audience a little bit about your background. How did you get to Amazon, and then from there to starting your own firm at Rossman Consulting?
Rossman Partners. Yeah, absolutely. So I was a partner at Arthur Andersen in the consulting business. I then went to a startup technology company, wound that down in 2001. One of my former Arthur Andersen colleagues was a finance director at Amazon, and he was like, you know, you should come over and talk to us. We've got a strategy we're thinking about. And so over the next 3 months, I interviewed. I think I had 21 interviews. It really was a consulting project to some degree, right? They were getting to know me, I was getting to know them, and like where this strategy was at. And so I joined in March of 2002, and we launched the marketplace business then late that fall. So I was at Amazon for about 4 years. Launched the marketplace business. I also ran enterprise services at Amazon. So I had responsibility for Target.com, Toys R Us, Marks and Spencer in the UK, Sears Canada, a bunch of other great brands. And I left Amazon in late 2005. I was a partner at another firm, and I started working with my clients on digital strategy, operations, clear thinking work. And one of my clients was the Gates Foundation, and
Okay.
I wrote this one piece called Future Ready Self-Service, and it was all about the power of making capability self-service, both internally and externally. And like it has so many healthy benefits to it. It forces you to build better, simpler capabilities and products. And one of my clients at the Gates Foundation pulled me into his office, and this is like 6 years after I left Amazon. And he's like, you wrote a really good paper. Then he gave me like the 10 things I should have done better on it and everything. He's an editor by background. It was pretty funny. And he goes, I've seen how you take all the little strategies, the nuggets, the insights from Amazon, and you delicately put them into our work. You don't hit us over the head with them. You're working us to think a little harder. And he goes, I think you ought to write a book about Amazon because it's such a fascinating company. So the smartest thing I did was talk him into being my partner on these books. We still work together today. And we just re-released the 3rd edition of The Amazon Way, which is about the leadership principle. So it's a pretty short, easy read. My whole design principle was somebody could read it on one plane ride with a glass of wine, and everything, right? It's no academic book, but it's kind of my story at Amazon and some of the things you can take from Amazon. I then wrote a bigger book called Think Like Amazon, 50 and a half ways to be a digital leader. That's like the full playbook of every little mechanism. The two books kind of go together. And that's really been my mission ever since then is, I always say, like, this isn't about Amazon. It's about you, how you're going to compete, how you're going to win in the digital era. And I borrow from a lot of places, including Amazon, of which I have some, authority to, because I got to participate there so much. And that's kind of what I do, and my story a little bit.
That's great.
And so today I kind of, I can help people in a variety of ways, right? You can read a book. I write a newsletter called the Digital Leader Newsletter. I do keynotes. I do workshops. I do consulting assignments. And so, again, my goal is to help leaders, help companies figure out how they're going to win and compete in the digital era. And I use any tool, any approach I can in order to get there. I think one of the real secrets from Amazon is, when people think about, digital transformation or digital capability, they tend to separate these segments of kind of strategy
Yes.
versus leadership versus culture versus technology and techniques, right? And I think that's a mistake. These things are integrated together. They have to be calibrated with each other. And so
Mm.
I'm always pulling on all of those, call them levers that we can pull to help make change happen. And so while I
Yeah.
say, hey, I'm a strategist, really, like, I'm a leadership coach. I'm a cultural advisor. I'm a technology and techniques consultant, and I'm a strategy consultant. And I pull from all of those. All I care about is getting results.
I think that's great, and I appreciate you sharing that about your background, and also, thank you for sending me the book. I enjoyed it as well, and I would agree it's a read that you can digest pretty quickly, but there's a lot of real nuggets of wisdom in here. And I think for a lot of businesses, they look at a company like Amazon, so successful, right? It's part of just about everybody's daily life, it seems. And yet sometimes they're wondering, well, how can I apply some of the things that made a business like that successful? And I'm just a small business. Sometimes there's scaling issues that make some of these things hard. But I thought that the 14 principles that you outlined in the book gave some real relevant kind of ideas for businesses to think about. And as I said at the top of the show, we're a marketing focused show. And so I'd like to talk about some of these principles and how you think they can help a business, especially when you talk about marketing. So if we start about, a principle, oh, go
Hey,
ahead,
hey,
go ahead,
can I suggest one thing? Is like just a
please.
reminder to the audience, like Amazon wasn't always this big. When I started at Amazon in 2002, holiday of that year, we had our first $1 billion quarter, right? So
Oh,
while
wow.
that's still a big company like that, this year they'll do 480 billion, and everything. But they operated with the same principles, the same approaches then. And we weren't successful, right? We were being referred to as Amazon.com, Amazon.toast. Amazon.org, because obviously we can't make money.
Yeah.
We were small. We had to be extremely frugal and use that as a constraint to innovate, not as a constraint to complain or limit our vision. And I just wrote about kind of constraints and in this environment in my newsletter today and everything.
I
And
saw
it's
that.
like it's a tremendous opportunity and everything, and you can get so much more done because people have just a better sense of urgency, and they're much less prone to analysis paralysis and more of just like, okay, we think this is do it, and everything, right? And so
Yes.
just don't think of Amazon as the Goliath we know today. Whether it was a team of 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, they still fought about the situation and they held each other accountable with the same approaches. And that's why, whether these principles are the ones you use or not, thinking through how do we make decisions, how do we hold each other accountable, how do we prioritize the customer, these sorts of things help you think better even on an individual basis.
I think that's so right. Any business that you're talking about, big or small, Apple almost went bankrupt. Amazon started out as a bookstore, right? They all had a genesis somewhere and they all grew to what they are today by trial and error and implementing good principles. And that's what I loved about a lot of what you talk about in the book. These are practical things that any business can really implement. And the first one I wanted to dive into a little bit is this idea of customer obsession, because certainly from a marketing standpoint, people look at marketing and say, oh, all these guys are trying to do is sell me something. But I think really good marketers are framing it into customer value, right? What can we really do to solve customer problems? So when you think back to Amazon and this principle, what's your thought on customer obsession?
Well, I actually listened to your prior podcast. I forget the gentleman's name, but you were talking about customer obsession and everything, and I thought that was a really good conversation. In general, I think there's two types of customer obsession. So first, I'll read the principle, and it says, leaders start with the customer and work backwards. They work vigorously to earn and keep customer trust. Although leaders pay attention to competitors, they obsess over customers. And the most interesting word in that principle is the word obsession, right? Like we could have
Yes.
chosen a more comfortable word, like we're focused on our customers or we care about our customers and everything, but we chose the word obsession for really specific purposes because it meant we were willing to do really hard things for the customer. So I think there's really two types of customer obsession, and I'll refer to one as tactical and the other as strategic. The
Okay.
tactical customer obsession is about getting today's customer, today's, we'll call it delivery, the promise you're making to your customer as perfect as possible, right? Exceed this customer's expectations. And so that drives all of your kind of operational excellence, the value proposition you make to your customer, and measuring every aspect of that customer experience for today. The other type of customer obsession, strategic. Well, that is really what helps you look up and down the customer value stream, find new ways of understanding your customer, having more empathy for them beyond just your product and your service, and always asking the question like, well, how can I serve this customer bigger and broader than I just served them today? And that lens of customer obsession is really been what's taken Amazon from being this books, music, video retailer to the conglomerate business that they are today, because they
Yes.
were exploring the customer, the longitudinal, the long point of view of the customer, and being really interested in, where's their friction, where's their poor value exchange relative to what they're getting, and they've been willing to do the hard things, which is build new products and services in order to insert themselves into that value proposition. So that's
Yeah.
one aspect of understanding customer obsession.
I love that you use the word friction because I use that a lot on this podcast. It sort of makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up a little bit because I think so many businesses have so much friction in their buying experience. And it's such a turnoff to customers. I'll give you a quick example. I just went and had my annual physical the other day, went into a doctor's office. The number of forms that I had to complete that required me to fill out the exact same information, none of which was different than they already had on file. And
Right.
then I go in and see my physician. They ask me all the same questions anyway. So it was just all this friction. It just makes for a terrible customer experience. And I think that that sort of rolls very nicely into sort of one of your second principles here, which is invent and simplify. I know as a marketer, when we go into businesses, often one of the first things that we have to do is deconstruct the mess that has been created, right? It's simplification, simplifying the messaging, simplifying, the collateral, the way you're presenting your products and services to customers. There's a lot of simplification that goes on, and I think that's been keys to Amazon as well, right? They're the inventor of one-click buying.
Yeah, well, you go exactly where I go to on this principle, right? The name of the principle is invent and simplify. And I think the invention piece is always, fascinating to people and sounds really hard, and everything. But what we recognize is that the and simplification
Mm,
aspect is both as important and as hard as inventing. And that simplification mindset, again, kind of comes in two general arenas, though, although they're connected. Obviously, simplifying the customer experience, and every single touch point you can have with them, not asking them to reintroduce themselves, essentially, which is the experience that you were having, and
yes.
other types of friction is important. But then the internally, as an operational leader, you are always looking to scale. And to scale means being able to do more on a declining cost per unit, right? Actually gaining efficiency. Most companies, they initially start getting scale, but then they actually they can do more, but it's not improving on an economic basis, right? And that's because they haven't done the work of simplifying the
Hmm.
work that needs to be done. And that is super hard, super important, and super uncomfortable work to do, because you have to challenge and um, force sometimes the uncomfortable conversations around, well, how does work get done? How's the organization structure look? Why do we do it this way? How do we get out of our own way in order to simplify the work that gets done? But when there's this concept called Conway's law, and Conway's law is essentially says that you ship your org chart, right? And that's what happens so often that customers see is like, hey, you buy something online, you go to the retail store, and they go, oh, well, we can't accept it because it's bought online. Like, that's essentially because the organization structure is split between stores and e-commerce, right? Like they've
Right.
shipped their org chart. The customer doesn't care about your org chart, right? They care about their experience. The reason it's called friction for me, like my is because it's the little tiny things that, yes, a customer can compensate for, but really you would never want it that way. And as an operator, you've kind of grown numb to it, right? You're blind to all of these little things. My favorite personal experience of friction is, and I hate to call anybody out, but I'm going to, is going to a Home Depot store, right? I've got a specific little light bulb that,
Hmm.
maybe I need, or something specific. It's in the store someplace, right? And not only is it difficult to find the aisle, but then you're sitting in front of this massive wall of light bulbs, and you're going up and down the wall trying to find the specific light bulb. I cannot understand, and somebody else say to me, "Well, John, they have an app for you to download that you can do this." Like that's way too much friction and everything.
Yes.
Why don't they have a little handheld device? I walk into the store, I grab the device, I can either take a photo, scan the UPC, or speak to it, and it says, "Hey, John, go to aisle 7." I go to aisle 7, and then all of a sudden, like a little light goes off. Well, here's the item on the wall.
Yes.
Try something like that, of really understanding the discovery in particular tends to be a really hard problem.
Hmm.
I always say about Amazon, like the only problem with being the everything store is it's the everything store, right? A customer isn't
Right.
looking for everything, they're looking for a thing. And so discovery at Amazon is a hard problem. Discovery at a lot of stores is a big problem. You need to rethink the discovery moments for a customer, and that really is oftentimes simplification work that needs to be done.
Yeah, I love that. Discovery. As a podcast host, this is a huge issue for us in this business because the tools aren't really very good right now for discovery. They're very uh, keyword focused. And if you're not
It,
using the right keyword, you don't even find what you're looking for. And for
right.
somebody who's looking for marketing services, well, what would they be searching for? Discovery is a really big deal. And I want to skip ahead to another point. And this is really around a bias for action because as a marketer, what we often find is, we're a cost center, we're an expense for a business. And businesses sometimes are reluctant to take action. They're reluctant to take that risk of spending the money because they're not certain about what the outcome is going to be. But you sort of have to be willing to take risks. You have to be willing to experiment. We always talk about marketing as a mixture of art and science, right? There is an art aspect to it. There is an experimentation. Nobody gets their messaging right out of the gate. Nobody gets that ad perfect right the first time, right? They have to experiment. So when you talk about a bias for action, how did you see that work inside Amazon, and how do you advise leaders to take those necessary risks?
Yeah. So the leadership principle reads like this. It says, "Speed matters in business. Many decisions and actions are reversible and do not need extensive study. We value calculated risk taking." And the way it manifested itself in the business is an understanding that all decisions aren't made equal, and that some decisions you need to slow down. You need to talk about a lot. You need to bring to the center. We call those one-way door decisions. Most decisions are two-way door decisions. They should be made with a little bit of discussion, a lot of intuition, and at speed. Because if we break down these decisions into more of a test and adapt, test and learn mindset, the speed element becomes even more that much more valuable versus just continual studying. And what you notice in most companies is that when you start slowing things down and you start making them into big study appointments, well, then what you do is you just make the decision bigger and bigger and bigger. And so it actually
Yes.
becomes a risk. It becomes a riskier decision at that point, right? It becomes more of a one-way door versus a two-way door decision. And the thing about these principles is they're balanced. You can't just over index on one. Sometimes they actually pull against each other, right? They're not in complete alignment. That typically leads you to a better set of thinking and a better outcome than if you were just using one principle. And um and at the end of the day, um leaders do need to have really good insights and proceed with speed and be willing to have both, responsibility and accountability relative to those decisions versus trying to kind of shift them off with others, and that just slows the business down and it doesn't grow good leadership.
I love the way you talk about the way these principles kind of pull at each other to find balance, because the next principle I want to talk about is frugality, right? And as a marketer, that's not a term I like to hear a lot because we're a cost center, right? We're an expense. You have to make an investment in
Spend,
marketing.
spend, spend. Yes,
Spend,
exactly.
spend, spend, right? But there's also a balance, right? There are things that we can do that are very cost effective, trying to create content to generate organic leads. And there are things that can be very expensive. A Super Bowl ad isn't cheap. So there are balances that need to be made. How do you sort of balance that, the bias for action with frugality and making sure that you're not just spend, spend, spend?
Yeah. So the spirit of the principle isn't about being cheap. It's about using resources smartly and using resource constraints as a forcing function to help you innovate. Like, how do you actually improve on the unit cost of whatever it is you're doing, right? On the item, maybe it's on customer acquisition. How do we actually get better at that and come up with better solutions? Because to scale, we know we need our unit costs in order to get better. I just wrote about this in the digital leader newsletter today about just the mindset of do more with less. And that mindset of do more with less is actually the mindset that helps you innovate. You use constraints in order to come up with a better approach, a more efficient approach in order to accomplish what you need to get it done. One of the things I wrote about in the newsletter is typically people go, they confuse, they translate do more with less to do less with less, right? Oh, well, if
Mm.
you're going to cut my spend, then I'm going to scale back. No, 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 no. The game plan for today's market volatility is do more with less. What we need from teams and from leaders is to actually be problem solvers and innovators and figure out a way, how do we get better at what we're doing, and using the constraint as an opportunity to force us to rethink whatever it is that we're working on.
Mm. Yeah, I like that. It's constraints sometimes really force the best ideas, right? They force a better approach. It's not a signal to pull back. It's a signal to be more creative, look at new ways of approaching a problem.
And when you're designing constraints, when you're designing the scenario that you're going to solve, or you're going to hand to a team, you really need to be thoughtful about the constraints you put in place. You always have to be like, well, if you're going to put these constraints in, what are you willing to do in order to meet those constraints? And if you put too many constraints in, you will put a situation into a no-win situation. And so designing, we'll call it an experiment or a scenario, and the smart constraints have to be really careful. And the other mistake somebody will make is they'll put just one constraint on, right? And
Hmm.
then a good team, just like they optimize to that constraint, right? Like lower the inventory level or whatever it is, or like lower the cost. Well, then what will happen is, yeah, we hit the inventory level, but guess what? In stock percentages plummeted, right? Okay, you didn't think through the constraints very well. So you always have to think through kind of the really smart constraints that you're going to put on. And that's why, none of these tools or approaches can be used without thinking about them, right? They need wisdom in order to use. It's a sophisticated playbook. At the end of the day, you can't have an evil attempt and you can't have a dumb attempt and be successful at any of these things. Like, you have to use them smart and with wisdom.
I agree. I agree. One of the things that we're facing in the world today, not just this country, but I think pretty much globally, is an erosion of trust. And you talk about your principle of this earning trust. And I know that a lot of the principle is really based on earning trust within the organization as a leader with your employees. But in marketing, we also have this brand persona that's out there, really earning the trust with the customer. And it's so hard to earn that trust and so easy to lose it, right? And we're in an era, I think, where customers and employees are reluctant to trust anyone, right? So, talk to me a little bit about this principle and how at Amazon they really built that trust and what you advise leaders in terms of earning it with their employees.
Yeah, so this is one of those topics where I would go like, in my humble opinion, this is my answer to you on this. There's probably other opinions on this, but I think when you take on an important topic like trust, you need to and it's kind of ethereal too, right? It's hard to pinpoint. You need to try to translate that into either specific scenarios or into specific tangible traits that you can have. So we took a concept when we were launching the marketplace business in 2002. We took the notion of, well, what did customer trust mean? Well, to us, it meant what was called a perfect order, right? A perfect order really meant that the right item was delivered on time with no customer questions, no deficiencies in the order, right? Like, so we had a really specific concept of what customer trust meant in one particular scenario. And then we said, well, how does that customer trust element translate into this new business called the marketplace business, which is third parties selling at Amazon?
Mm-hmm.
If you remember back in the day, you and I might be old enough to remember this. Well, eBay was the king of the marketplace business at
Yep.
that point, and it was a kind of the wild west of marketplaces, right? It was very much kind of, eBay was like, hey, we're just connecting two parties together. We take no accountability to it at all. We took the exact opposite approach because we knew what trust meant for our customers, right? So our entire strategy was built off of this element of customer trust, and the way we defined it into tangible terms, which meant we were able to then measure it, and then we were able to implement and design around it. And so take an element like customer trust, put it into specific terms, then measure it and design around it. And that helps make these elements critical as well as manageable to a business.
When you talk about measurement and design around it, I think you just made a perfect segue into sort of this final point that I wanted to talk about, which is delivering results, right? Many businesses, they go throughout the year and then sort of whatever is left over at the end of the year are the results that they've achieved versus really designing a plan, whether it's profitability or certain metrics. They just don't have a plan in place to achieve them. And oftentimes organizations within a company are fighting with different goals and objectives. So it makes it very hard for the organization as a whole to achieve something. So when you look at this sort of holistically, how do you advise leaders really to, deliver the results and design around that?
Yeah, well, let's read the leadership principle. So much of the secret of the leadership principle, there's kind of the short title, but then there's a paragraph that kind of
Yeah.
opens up, right? And so it reads: leaders focus on the key inputs for their business and deliver them with the right quality and in a timely fashion. Despite setbacks, they rise to the occasion and never settle, right? Oh, interesting understanding. Amazon, while we focused a lot on the outputs of the business, of defining like, hey, what are our goals? We spent more time writing out and debating what the inputs were. What are the things we're going to do in order to get there? That made us much better actionable planners, right? Like we knew what the plan was, and then before we agreed, we said, does everybody agree with this plan or not? Not just the goal, but the actual plan. And in any business, you always have dependencies, right? So if you have these planning discussions that has both outputs but more priority on the inputs, and you talk about them as a team, guess what? All your colleagues, all your dependencies are part of the plan, right? They have buy-in, they have an opportunity to shape it. You're going to execute so much better, and you're going to make better resource allocation decisions, right? The most important decisions senior leadership teams make, and this is what true strategy is what do I say yes to and what do I say no to? You have to say no to a lot of really good concepts. And what happens in so many businesses is they say yes to specific things, but they don't deliberately, specifically in a broadcast manner, make it clear of which things we are saying no to. So what happens is resources get confused, teams start, working on things that it's a good idea, but we said no to it, and everything, right? That's the linkage between strategy and execution. And you tend to lose when you're not completely focused, completely bought in to what the plan is, which is a good complement to the 13th leadership principle. This deliver results is the 14th. The 13th is called have backbone, disagree, and commit. And that principle is all about how we debate things, but then we make a decision and we all buy in to that decision, whether we agree with it or not, right? And so again, these principles have linkage together. And I, from a planning standpoint, I think the tool of OKRs, objectives and key results, is a good tool, a good methodology to talk about both the outputs and the inputs, the key results that are going to get us there and everything. But it really is about taking the time to write them out and then debate them as a team and be clear about what you're saying yes to. And as importantly, maybe even more importantly, what are the good ideas we're saying no to for now?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the story that I've heard is Jeff Bezos was the one who sort of enforced this idea that if we're going to have a meeting, all the materials had to go out to the team before the meeting. So we're not looking at things for the first time. We're able to discuss those inputs. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's not so much before the meeting, but things get written in narratives, in paragraphs. You actually read those in the meeting, though. So a meeting starts with 15 or 20 minutes of reading the document, whatever the concept is, whatever the proposal, whatever the plan, whatever the correction of error that we're looking at, it's written out, and then you discuss it, right? PowerPoint, it essentially abstracts completeness of thought. And when you're talking about complex topics, PowerPoint is the wrong tool to do it with. And it was just, it wasn't just Jeff. Everything Jeff was like the person who yes, this is what we're doing. It came from over a period of time from a lot of people contributing to it. And then Jeff, yes, this is a better way for us. And he, in no undelicate terms, let everybody know, hey, we don't use PowerPoint anymore. We write things out, and they've developed these techniques, these different styles of writing. And it truly is a superpower to clear thinking and better discussion.
I love this. And I really appreciate these principles that you've written down and framed, because like I said at the top of the show, I think these are so applicable to so many businesses. You don't have to be a large Fortune 500 company for these to make sense, or have a large organization. Even a small business like my own, these are perfect things to be mindful of as you build and grow your business.
I just want to be clear. These aren't my principles. These are Amazon's principles. I just happened to get to be there at a point when when we were figuring out what these principles were. I do have an appendix in the book that is about how to build your own principles. My take, I've worked with a few teams on building principles, and kind of the iterative mindset that I would recommend, the approach that I would recommend in building your principles, versus I think the mistake some teams make is they go, yes, we need principles. They write them out, and then they say, these are the principles. That typically doesn't work real well. You need to have, I always use the phrase etch in Jello. You want to etch these in Jello, try them out, use them. It's so critical to get the executive team modeling these and holding each other accountable with them. And that's how real culture change happens from a intentional leadership standpoint.
They aren't just for a poster in the conference room, in other words.
That is the saying, exactly.
Yeah. No, this is great. And I really enjoyed reading the book. And I'd love it if you could just share how people can get a copy of this book, how they can get a hold of you, where they can find you on the web.
Yeah. So the Amazon Way is available of course, at Amazon, paperback, Kindle, Audible version. The Audible version is a real nice listen and everything. I write a newsletter called the Digital Leader Newsletter. It's on Substack. It's free. And you can find me on LinkedIn, John Rossman, or my website is rossmanpartners.com.
Hey, John, that's great. This has been a fascinating discussion. Thank you again for sending over the book. I really enjoyed it, and we'll certainly pass it along with friends. I will make sure that everything that you mentioned today is linked up in the show notes so that people can find you and find the book on the web. It's been a fascinating discussion. I've really enjoyed our time here today. Thank you so much.
Eric, thank you. Thank you for everything you do. I really enjoy all of your conversations.
I really appreciate that. Thanks again.